Good evening, everyone. Good afternoon or good morning, depending where you are. We'll be waiting for a few seconds so that everyone can vote in or everyone can zoom in. Welcome to Design Open Happy. We are privileged to have a speaker who's going to close this season of Design Open Happy that we launched a few months ago. And here we are. Time is flying. Sonia, how are you doing with this flying time?
I'm good, but time really is flying, and there's so much to be done, and it's so difficult to do it like this. It's so much easier face to face, but otherwise good. So as long as you stay healthy and safe, I guess it's all right.
Yeah. Hi, Gabriel. Thanks for zooming from Portugal. Do not hesitate to ping where you are viewing us from. You can put your city in the chat, and we have two zones for interaction, the chat box and the Q&A box. So we are privileged to have Mugendi K. Mirta from Kenya, or let us say based in Kenya nowadays. And he will spend an hour with us exploring multiple dimensions of design. Hi, Gaurav. It's good, Gaurav. Milano is there. So while some of you are still zooming in, let me quickly share what Design Open Happy is. It's a series of conversations that we launch with Sonia Manchanda, who's co-hosting this with me, Alok Nandi. And we are trying to explore, as I said, different dimensions of design. And we were happy to have already 7 episodes. And here we have Mugendi for the 8th episode. And what is great is that during this journey, the Design Open journey, we saw so many insights adding up. And so I would suggest for those of you who are newcomers or who have missed some of the episodes that you go on designopen.in/happy and you'll find the recording of the previous conversations. Sonia, tell us more about Design Open.
So fundamentally, Design Open was created to be a space, like an open space, where you can map emergence, map the shifts as they happen. So a lot of us, we are working at the front lines, we know what's happening in industry, and we are using design as strategy. And so we come back with those lessons and we talk about them and we reflect on them. And through those reflections, we really get the insights we need. So fundamentally, Design Open was created as that space for conversation. And it was created to be something that would accompany a design exhibition, but then it became an entity by itself because the conversations were so powerful. We were able to then not just, it started in Bangalore and started as an independent event here, then went on to becoming a part of Hyderabad Design Week, Kochi Design Week, and it became the after party. Because this is where the real, the depth of conversations was taking place, and people were happy to spend a whole day. So if you look back, we've had 7 editions, we've gone across 3 cities, we've had 50 speakers and really powerful speakers coming and sharing insights. And the brief we always give is, we need insights here. We're all working out there. We need to take back some of these insights that inform our work. Rather than sort of examining it after the fact, we look at it as it happens. We immerse in it as it happens. So it's a space an open space for immersion, conversation, reflection, critical thinking, insighting. So that's really what Open is, and Happy adds a nice new dimension to it.
Super. And today we are privileged to have Mugendi from, as I mentioned, based in Kenya, but he has been in so many places. He has been active in so many areas that we'll have a fascinating conversation here. Mugendi, you are a transdisciplinary industrial designer, educator, researcher, nowadays at Machakos University in Kenya. But you studied in Kenya, you studied in the US, in India, in South Africa, and then you have been busy educating, lecturing in Botswana, in South Africa, in Sweden, and in India. So with all your passions and your journeys, we'd spend an hour asking ourselves what is happening with climate change, with social innovation, and so many other complex questions. On the chat box, I see that Jonathan Strebel is there. He was one of our previous speakers. Hi, Jonathan. And so many speakers from different parts. So we'll try to build on also on some of the previous conversations. And Mugendi, so good to be with you. As a design activist, as an ambassador, you are one of the very first person who I heard about the K of Africa. So it would be good for our audience, which is a global audience, to get a sense of AFRIKA and what are the multiple layers we are having with this Africa and its spelling. Mugendi.
Thanks, Alok and Sonia, and hi everyone. Already got some nice messages from Jonathan and Gabriel and others. Well, Africa is an interesting place, if I can start that conversation that way. And I see Aletia is also there, my former colleagues from Cape Town. So I'm very much in a very happy place. So I'm living up to the theme of what you're doing, open and happy. Because Africa is such a vast space. We have over 2,200 languages on the continent and myriad cultures which reflect and have inspiration and influence from just about every other part of the world. But what is unique to Africa is that of all these 2,200 languages plus, every single one of them actually spells Africa with a K. So that's the first point of bringing in this K. Secondly, there's a famous Nigerian author known as Chinua Achebe, who referenced the people of his culture and said that until lions have their own historians, tales of the hunt will always glorify the hunter. Now, what it means by this is that usually the person who tells a story embellishes it with their own experience, their own aspirations and expectations. And often in the course of economic use of language or even metaphors, we fail to take cognizance of the other side of the story. So the idea is that myself and a number of people have taken this idea of Africa with a K to represent Africa as seen from the inside out. This is Africa co-creating its own narrative about what it hopes the world to understand about it as a contrast, not as a contradiction, but a contrast to Africa with a C, which is how, Africa is seen from the outside in. This is how we maybe position it as Africa seen by the rest of the world. So it's essentially saying, this is our story. We are co-creating a new narrative on the continent, a very happy, open, and positive narrative, if I might even link it to your themes. And the K lends itself very well as an epistemological tool, but also as a device that kind of differentiates the different perspectives to emphasize the one of Africans on the continent telling their own story, and Africa is viewed from our perspective and shared with the rest of the world.
That's great. And yourself, you have been one of the founding members of the Network of Africa Designers, NAD, and you have also been busy with the Pan-African Design Institute. So about co-creating all these narratives, what are some of the burning insights and questions coming from you want to share with us on the planet?
Yeah, thanks again, Alok. I think one of the first things we recognize as designers, before I speak about Africa, is that increasingly we are realizing the power of storytelling as a device that we use as designers. We've realized that technologically we can create or design just about anything, But if it lacks soul, and soul is brought in by the sense of story, the way it references place and space, and the way people interweave these narratives with their own aspirations and experiences. So storytelling is a very powerful element of what we understand design to be, first of all. Secondly, Africa, as many people would know, has rich oral traditions. Storytelling is one of them, which has benefited us, and that was, for the most part, the chief means by which knowledge was transferred from one generation to the next. The other element of storytelling was that it invited interpretation and even retranslation. So it was like an open source tool, if you may, where people could actually take the essence of what you've said, rehash it, and then say it in their own words, with their own examples, and with their own sense of drama and emphasis, so that it speaks to them, so that the story is owned by the person who is telling it and not just the original source of the story. So as designers on the continent of Africa, we recognize that power of storytelling. We've recognized the power of design as a unifying platform. In fact, we often have this joke that, you know, trust me, I'm a designer, and I would like to make a t-shirt which I can wear, actually saying exactly that. Because designers, particularly in the 21st century, where there's so many wicked problems that politicians and other leaders have failed to solve, suddenly design thinking and design methodologies and tools become quite amenable to this idea that maybe we can do something different. And the first issue there is about participation. So it's more about co-design and co-creation. Second one is about inclusion, that everyone is invited. So it's open and people can feel free to join in. Then the other thing is suspending judgment, because no conversation or contribution is too minimal, too small to be accommodated. And we employ also tools like proverbs, dance and music to kind of emphasize this notion. And just to give an example, if you want to tell someone that their voice is important, you'll tell them something like, if you think you're too small to make a difference, try spending a night in a closed room with a mosquito. And suddenly that kind of gives you the sense that a mosquito may be one of the tiniest creatures around, but it really scares the living daylights out of most of us. So we're much bigger than mosquitoes, so to speak. And hopefully our voices do count and can make a huge contribution to this kind of conversation.
That's great, because the example you're using of the mosquito allows us to see the role of the designer as zooming in, zooming out. And that is one of the insights which I find we need to remind and remember always, this capacity of zooming in and zooming out. And another reaction I have listening to the proverb by Achebe you used about the lion and the hunter and the power of stories is that designers vis-a-vis business, we need to make sure that stories are coming from designers' point of view and not only from business and business schools' point of view. So that is another insights that I think all of us, we need to remember when we are talking about the role of design. Now we are at the crossroad of design and Africa, and there is a fascination with the K, the letter K of Africa, and K is also in your name. Maybe you could share some insights about this K.
Okay, thanks. It just happened coincidentally that I happen to have a K in my middle name. And when I discovered that I was very passionate about Africa with the K, I decided that I'll not be leaving it out of my official name, not just Mugendi Mtwaridha, but Mugendi K. The K actually stands for my middle name, which is a name that is my grandfather's name after whom I'm named. And his K stands for Kanampiu. And Kanampiu is essentially a warrior. So Kanampiu is an arms bearer. And I might not bear arms in the traditional sense of being a warrior, but I think if I live up to my first name far more. Mugendi means a traveler. But if I'm a traveler who's bearing arms, maybe then the arms could be benign and benevolent for the human family. And maybe those tools that I carry are not weapons of mass destruction, but hopefully tools for conviviality, as Ivan Illich put it in one of his books.
That's great, because then you are defining the notion of design through the tools you're carrying and your travels. And so, Sonia, what are your reactions to all these elements that Mugendi is already sharing with us?
Well, I'm just enjoying listening to him. I'm loving every word that he says. I'm thinking about the fact that you're saying co-design, you're saying suspend judgment, you're talking of being a warrior. Gandhi was a warrior. I won't make a reference to something else we discussed before this show started, because it's supposed to be between us. So, but I'm going to ask you, when you come together and you're a warrior and you have these tools, what are those stories that need to be rekindled? What are the actions you're taking in this moment? We are at an unprecedented time in history across the planet. We're all connected. So maybe there's something we can learn from all the proverbs and the stories. So what are those stories that you think need to be rekindled? And therefore, where is your focus at the moment? I love the inside out metaphor as well, because even in Hindu philosophy, we have this idea of aham brahmasmi, that there is no depth that is not within you, there is no height that is not within you. If you've explored yourself, you've really explored the entire universe. So, coming from the confidence of the cave, what are those, in this moment, with all the weapons that you have, the stories that are being rekindled? And as warriors, we are actors, so what are those actions, what are those stories that are being created or rekindled? I'm curious to know.
Thanks, Sonia. First thing I realize is that design is a political act, it's a political action. And I say politics with a small p, lest the politicians think we are usurping their space. The reason I say this is because increasingly design has taken a stance that contradicts the popular notions of the day, where everyone is harping on problems. Designers typically are more optimistic and try to be part of the solution. So the idea of activism, or design activism specifically, is not just to produce heat through noise, but to translate that heat into light. And I think one of the ways in which we do this is by recognizing the interconnectedness of our human family. And just picking up on both what you and Alok have said, what the COVID-19 pandemic has reminded us, sometimes shockingly, because maybe we'd lost touch with that reality, is that we are all interconnected. And I'll just reference a Ghanaian proverb for that, which basically says that if you notice your neighbor's beard on fire, you better keep some water next to yours. Previously, when we saw SARS and other pandemics or epidemics, because they did not become pandemics then, we thought it was an Asian issue, and the rest of us carried on with life as if nothing happened. What this pandemic has done, it has almost force-fed empathy into us. It has made us realize that we must accept that we are interconnected. And importantly, as designers, and this is where the activism comes in, we must respond with action. Design is a noun as well as a verb. It demands action. So I find that we live in very interesting times when our profession actually has come of age, first of all. And then it's also grown out of the shadows of the professions it was allied with initially. So in the 19th and 20th centuries, we relied heavily on fields like psychology, engineering, mechatronics, and maybe sociology. And now we have come full circle to start to understand that actually there are some unique tools, there's some unique lenses that design can lend itself to when you're addressing multifaceted challenge. And some of this we've already mentioned, but they also make us realize that, okay, design is relevant, even more so, more than it ever was. And we need to move into this expanded view of design, not just as dealing with products, but also with services and systems, and ultimately with user experiences as we define it within the World Design Organization. So this gamut of expressions of the design profession within this extended spectrum kind of gives us the touch points where design touches just about every sphere of our lives. Everyone interacts with products. We are completely enveloped in systems. Services has become a bigger industry now than even manufacturing. And ultimately, user experience is the last touch point. And we often say that the last mile is a human mile. So after you've experienced all these products, all these services, all these systems, the user experience is ultimately the one we emphasize. And so fields like interaction design and user-centered design and user experience design have become critical for us to understand how important it is to delight and surprise people in the way they interact with the man-made and or man-made or designed world that we live in. So this I find to be an exciting time, really, because there's a time you talk about design and you basically clear the room. And now when you speak about design, people actually want to engage a bit more. And they are interested beyond the product. And this is what makes us designers, no matter what discipline you are or sub-discipline you are within, we have the same mindset, the same attitude towards challenges, the same tools within our creativity toolkit, and we are able to respond in a collaborative, collective, and empathic manner.
So you're saying all these connections, and what has happened now is that we're all connected and there's an extended kindness. And that will help us to be able to redesign the human experience in this moment, because we have no choice really as actors to be able to do that.
Indeed. Because we often speak about empathy as a critical attribute of a good designer, the social consciousness that the modern designer has to embody means that you must be open to people, you must be a good listener, a good observer, and speak less and watch more. And I think this kind of idea of empathy, which almost borders on the spiritual notions of what it means to be human, making designers increasingly important, because the world needs empathy. We are living in such a complex and world with so many wicked problems. Like now we look at things like racism, and we see extremism, and we see what has happened with the disruptiveness of the COVID-19, with unemployment and political and social strife. Now suddenly you need a contrary voice, not the one that is a doomsday kind of voice, but one of hope. And this is where design comes in, because designers are naturally, or even professionally, at least optimistic. We believe that we can be part of the solution. And by co-opting other fields in a transdisciplinary manner, we are not just saying designers can save the world alone. No, we're saying designers and, so design plus. And that plus is just about any other person of goodwill or any other discipline of goodwill that can actually strengthen our voices as we try to work together to engage with these intractable and wicked problems we deal with.
Yeah. So at one level, I agree with you, and I believe in the optimistic view. But I have a further question. At one level, there is this forced empathy. We've been forced into a scenario where we have to have empathy because we are all, after all, connected. But at another, there is also fear. And that fear, you think there's a clash between the two? You think design can sort of transcend that? How can design help with that situation? The clash between this whole exaggerated fear, you're fearful, there's so much social anxiety, and at another level, we are saying there's forced empathy. So how do you think, how will this sort of battle get waged, and how will we win in the end?
Yeah, thanks again, Sonia. I think fear is a product of many things, or a byproduct. And one of those catalysts for fear is ignorance. I'd say sometimes it's because people don't know the other. And so because of that lack of knowledge, they are fearful. There's a statesman from Western Africa who once said that I feel the other, I dance the other, therefore I am. And what he's saying there is with them, so to speak, which is about dialogue. You start to understand them, and therefore you become a better person. The other product of or byproduct, or the catalyst for fear, I believe, is arrogance. And arrogance comes from believing that you have all the answers, or no other story is valid except yours. So your own reality is the only reference or frame of reference you can make. With arrogance, unfortunately, one has to deal differently. Where ignorance you teach, with arrogance you confront. And you confront it with, of course, firmness, but also with empathy, because some arrogance comes also out of fear of losing control or whatever the reason is. And I think part of what designers need to do is also to engage with people the root cause of what they're dealing with. So connected we are, and what makes us human, the commonalities, the universal aspect of being human. If it's arrogance, it needs to be countered. And we've seen the excesses of arrogance, toxic masculinity or racism and so on. So we need to deal with these issues firmly, but also with empathy, knowing that we're dealing with another human being who has fears because maybe they feel that if they give up that false notion of power, that they will become less of a human being. And I believe ultimately by engagement, and this is what this particular pandemic has done, it has reminded us that as much as we are connected, there's also been a lot of false stories or parallel information, whether it's fake news, spreading, and that unfortunately led to fear and the fear of stigmatization and so on. But as people start to engage with it and more people come out and say, hey, I got this thing, I've recovered, stigma somehow diminishes. And I think as soon as we identify something, we shine a light on that shadow, that fear dissipates, because the shadow sometimes looms larger than reality because our minds have a way of imagining it to be worse than it actually is. And because of this, we need to also understand that the world is multifaceted, it's complex, and that there are multiple views and multiple voices. There's a beautiful TED talk that says, beware the single story. And I subscribe to that notion that if everyone's telling the same story, there's reason to be cautious and even a bit skeptical. But if you can have those levels of discourse and dialogue without losing respect for the other or losing even your essential self, I think that could be very healthy, even in a designerly sense.
Thank you so much for that. So you're saying basically what I understand is at this moment, design can be that light.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Thank you so much.
Yes,
yeah, that's great.
Design needs to shine that light on the shadow,
Yes.
so that it loses its scariness.
Yes. That's beautiful.
Yeah, and it allows us to talk about one emerging thread that we saw through different Design Open Happy episodes, which was that question of, can design fix the future? And I would like you to react to that. And maybe I would ask a sub-question, because you talked about co-design and co-creation. My question would be, how can we dance together to fix the future? Because you used the dance as a strong mode of empathy. And so my question is, how can we dance together to fix the future? How would you react to that?
Yeah, thanks a lot. In fact, there's a Kenyan proverb that says that when the drum beat changes, the dance steps must change accordingly. So the first thing is we need to realize that the world is dynamic, change is inevitable. So we need to be able to embrace change and actually bring in that change into our dance. So if it's syncopated and fast moving, we can increase our tempo, and when it relaxes into something more chilled, if I can put it that way, we should also be able to pace ourselves accordingly. Now, as you ask whether we can fix the future, I think it's a matter of realizing that there's so many different speeds at which this dance is happening. Some people are dancing slowly because what they're dealing with is over maybe how to deal with design for the elderly, transgenerational design, and so on. Where others are very youthful populations, like in Africa, where about 35%, in fact, up to 50% in some regions of people less than 35 years old. And if you're dealing with very dynamic, fast-moving environments and some slowing down, I think then design needs to anticipate some of these movements and not come up with solutions of a one-size-fits-all. So the point you made about co-design and co-creation is critical because it means engagement and it means inclusion. Because once you start to dialogue, the issues that are close to people's hearts start to emerge. And so instead of being prescriptive and trying to come up with a one-size-fits-all, we should have a customized or customizable or adjustable strategy in which each region or each community can actually tailor make whatever it can using the same tools, but actually making the emphasis on what means something to them. Having said that, I feel the age of design has come. I feel designers need to enter political office. I'm not volunteering, but I'm thinking there are people somewhere out there who can enter political offices and change things. The reason I'm saying this, if you look at a city like Curitiba in Brazil, where they had Jamie Meyer, who was a Hermie, who was an architect, and you see, and architecture is a form of design. If you see what he did to that city by solving the problems that were there, from congestion to traffic, to transportation, to garbage collection, and so on, the design thinking that went into those solutions became global benchmarks and examples. And this is one, and we've seen many other cities where the mayor has been someone who comes from the expanded design community. So there's actually kind of an emphasis on design becoming more important. We've also seen in some of the so-called Fortune 500 companies where designers have taken the helm of those companies as CEOs, and we've seen what those companies have done in terms of turning around and becoming forces for good. So there's no doubt in my mind that the age of design has dawned upon humanity, and we may need to take bolder steps so that this voice that we share, this consciousness, the design consciousness that we have, could actually be shared with a broader community. At his root, Gandhi actually was a designer. He was a social designer. And we know that he dealt with complex issues like politics, as well as self-determination and so on. And he was able to do that using things like the spinning wheel and what it means to be able to make your own clothing. And I think the time has come for designers to use such tools to understand and unlock the potentiality of humanity, to also start to solve their own problems. Because I actually believe that it has come to the point where we know enough now about the values and the efficacy of design thinking to start to implement it in society. So maybe some of you who are listening, I hope, will take the plunge and be inspired to take some political leadership, or at least work with politicians as advisors or parts of their extended networks of think tanks to start to influence policy and direction in our own spheres of influence.
Yeah, that's a good call for action that we have seen also emerging in some of the previous Design Open Happy sessions, and it's good, Mugendi, that you insist on that. It's a political act, and we need to be activist and show that we are walking the talk. So what I'm suggesting now is to all the attendees, if you have questions, just punch them into the Q&A box, or eventually you can have your comments into the chat box. Building on some of the elements you mentioned, I see that Regitze, she's based in Denmark. She mentions that in Danish, Africa is written with a K.
Oh, so we have friends out there that are part of our worldview, which is fantastic. Yeah, well, we've just adopted Denmark as a sister nation to African countries. So we have 55 countries in Africa. Denmark can be hyperlinked.
So that is something I wanted to highlight about connectedness. And then Gabriel Patrocinio is mentioning the notion of acupuncture urban design because of your example of the mosquito. And often I talk about we designers, we are acupuncture designers because we can't act everywhere. So we need to find the sweet spots where we can push in the right way. What would be your thoughts? Not being a mosquito, of course, because mosquito also are in a way acupuncture.
Yeah, I agree. Maybe that's the closest we've had. I think the Chinese developed acupuncture too, and the Indian civilizations did much better with acupuncture. The mosquito just takes a bit of blood from each of us, which is not necessarily good. But I agree. I think what we learned from the mosquito is its ability to make an impact that may not even be felt at the moment, but has lasting impressions. And so I would actually agree with that idea of the acupuncture, where you touch a nerve somewhere, but it radiates way beyond that point, and also way after the point of contact. So I'd actually suggest that that would actually be a very nice way, because it is not also very intimidating, because acupuncture, you do so much good. You don't have to carry large syringes to scare the living daylights out of people with painkillers. You just need pins, and those little pins, each one of them looks very innocuous and harmless. But I guess when you put the whole body with them, then you realize they're quite effective. So if we have those little nodes, those little points of acupuncture that are interconnected, then I think it makes sense. I subscribe to the idea of a distributed system, not centralized systems, so that each little distributed node is interconnected to every other node remotely, even though it's acting locally. So that to me would be a very nice metaphor. And I just wanted to say hi to Ephias Ruhode, who's my friend from Cape Town. I saw that he put up the reference of Curitiba in Brazil, where Hemi Lerner, the architect mayor, was working. So that case in point.
Yeah, and I see that I have misspelled Curitiba. I have had some extra letters while typing quickly, so.
I wanted to add something on that Curitiba note, and in 2010, we created a project here in India. It was called the Dreamin Project, and I did not even know about Curitiba, but somebody came from Curitiba, joined the project, and replicated the entire project in Curitiba, and I was invited to speak there because it's such a progressive city. It embraces these ideas. So what you're talking about is this whole thing of dancing together and kindness. And I'm seeing almost a network forming of kindred spirits, of people sort of even from the outside enable political action by even bringing in people who are right-minded in the political sphere. You know, you don't even have to be on the inside. And we've seen this happen where we can actually sort of influence things. And the conversation is leading me to think of a whole collective, you know, and a lot of the people here are already part of that. So these conversations, and this can lead to something like that, where we actually sort of connect the dots and sort of dance together as kindred spirits who are in our own ways little mosquitoes, and, you know, with the acupressure points, making a difference in our geographies and sharing the lessons and sort of acting together while acting alone from the inside out. So I know you mentioned about kindred spirits when we were speaking last. So if you can sort of build on your thoughts on that.
Yes, I think, Sonia, I totally agree. We are finding more and more that what concerns humanity, and I'm not just speaking about the issues that someone like Abraham Maslow identified as the universal human needs, but there's so many things that we share in common. And even if people are at different levels of that particular pyramid of needs, there's commonalities of what we want to achieve. I think Manfred Max Neef extended it to some 9 points where he talks about things we do, being, doing, and so on, and interacting. So we need to start to see ways in which kindness, which is a very good human virtue, can actually underline everything we do. We can call it goodwill, we can call it empathy, can call it compassion, but kindness to me, and I like the word you chose because kind also it means people who share something in common, kindred, people who are related or interrelated. And if we start to work together, we'll find that there's actually an army of people of goodwill that are willing to, you know, do things to change, to affect the environments within they live, and also ultimately across the world, there are other communities that are willing to connect. And we live in interesting times, because with the internet now, we're able, like this virtual platform we're on, simultaneously we are speaking from so many different places, yet all speaking with one voice on the same idea and in total agreement. So I think we need to start to explore virtual communities and how these voices of ours could become catalysts. I'm almost afraid that I kind of glorified the mosquito a little bit, because the mosquito also is a source of great pain on this continent. It does more harm than many. So I'd like to paraphrase that and say we can be benign or benevolent mosquitoes. As long as that is prefixed, then I'm more comfortable. Otherwise, there are places, if I speak of mosquitoes, I will not be very popular.
That's great. So if we step back and we look at the questions we are getting through the Q box, we have some super fascinating ones. Shall we jump into the Q&A sessions, Sonia?
Yes, sure.
Yeah. Mugendi, are you ready to react and interact with our audience?
Yes,
so we
I am.
have Soen Pak. Great. We have Soen Pak who's asking about your position of an African design educator. How can we keep on, protect African beauty, start from nature and all great tribe cultures through the design? So I guess if I may add some words to that, how can we build on what he's now said about indigenous culture? We see that in Australia, in Canada, in so many other parts of the world. How can we try to respect and protect that knowledge and have that embedded into design? If I may add that to Soen Pak's question, what would be your insights?
Excellent. I think that's a very important point, because those who do not respect their past tend to repeat, first of all, mistakes that they could have avoided. So there's wisdom in referencing one's past, and then also being a good steward and a custodian of what is good about culture. Culture is dynamic. We need to acknowledge that. Things are constantly changing, and that is because of the way interactions improve on our thinking. And some of what we have, we keep, and some of the things we find not very useful, we discard. But having said that, in terms of African beauty, cultures, maybe even our natural vegetation and wildlife, it would be useful to, first of all, do an inventory and see that as an asset. I think when people don't value something, they tend to downplay it or even lose it and ignore it. I think we used to describe value as what people are willing to pay for. So if you don't put a value to what you have as an asset, whether it's natural beauty or non-tangible heritage like culture, then it's not respected. And I think there's whole elements of design that can do archiving and referencing of that. The Ghanaians have a number of Adinkra symbols that, and one of them, which I like very much, is the one of a bird that is preening itself by turning back and preening its back. And that symbol, if you see it, it's stylized in some forms, basically means we should learn from the past. And I think by referencing the past with the future in mind, I think that's the only way we can actually keep that which works, which is good, and also move forward at the same time. Secondly, I think I'm happy to hear that particular question, because Africa is still one of the few places that has a lot of unspoiled scenery, a lot of pristine land where we have wildlife and people coexisting. I'm in Nairobi as we speak. Nairobi is the only capital city in the world which has a game park of animals, wildlife right in the city itself. Actually, as we speak, I met a zebra not far from where I'm living. And the other day, a warthog escaped from through the fence and was walking in the traffic. And it was very surprising to see from Disney's Lion King, what we'd call Pumbaa. Pumbaa was walking very happily in the streets. But that's just one thing. So this is a heritage we need to honor and respect and keep it for posterity and for humanity. That's important. And because of the interconnectedness of the world now, there are people who may have lost some of these kind of beauty and scenery, but they can access it by visiting us. So as long as we realize that what we have, we keep for posterity and for humanity, and do not become chauvinistic and arrogant and say it's ours, because ultimately this world belongs to all of us. Where you're born is just an accident of history. And so to become too chauvinistic about one's history sometimes also negates the possibility of making connections or building bridges to other cultures. So I'd agree. I think I'd like to invite that particular friend of ours to come and visit Kenya. I recommend highly July, August, so they can see the Great Migration, which is one of the few remaining spectacles of that scale in the world, where about 2 to 3 million animals, including zebra and wildebeest, cross from the Tanzanian side of the Mara River into Kenya. And it's spectacular, that's all I can say. And it's something that almost one experiences at a spiritual level, because just realize how beautiful nature actually is. And I think design is about celebrating nature and celebrating beauty. And one of the things that we celebrate as designers is the aesthetic sensibility that we inherit through our sister profession of, say, fine art, for example, making the world beautiful and making the world happier by deploying these tools that we have naturally in terms of creativity.
Great. And Manuel Toscano is asking, with great power comes great responsibility. What is the single most important thing designers need to look into when it comes to their own limitations? I would assume some of the insights have been pushing towards the answer, but maybe you can build on Manuel's question.
Yes, I agree with great power comes great responsibility, no doubt. And maybe one of the things that tempers design is because we naturally lean towards being part of the solution, because people have used power to also, do things which are destructive. But I believe that the power of design is creative, not destructive. So we talk about creativity. And if we also acknowledge as human beings with a heavy dose of humility, I totally believe that as human beings and as designers, humility is a very good attribute to embrace, because it acknowledges that I don't have all the answers and I am part of the human family and I need everyone else in order to, to be effective. So in the same way, when we do co-design or co-creation, we dissipate the traditional top-down hierarchy to a kind of a circular, or what I would call an Ubuntu kind of structure where every voice is important. In fact, from the Chaos Pilots, I learned something called leadership from any chair, meaning that any person in any setting, given an opportunity, can actually be a huge contributor to an idea that could actually be quite inspirational to the collective. So we need to acknowledge that humility means that we accept that we are only human, even though we mean well. And then also to work with like-minded people. Find that if you find people who think like you and work like you, only good can come out of that kind of setting. So yes, with great power comes great responsibility. And I think having that element of humility will always be a kind of a check and a balance, so that we don't think that we we have a messiah complex. We are not able to do everything. We can only do our little bit and influence our little corner of the world, and hopefully make that into a ripple that goes further and reaches other parts of the world eventually.
Good. Ubuntu. I think it's important to remind all our attendees the notion of Ubuntu. I think that will be helpful, if you don't mind.
Oh, yes, thank you. I referenced Leopold Senghor's proverb of, I feel the other, I dance the other, therefore I am. So that kind of alluded to Ubuntu. But Ubuntu specifically is a philosophy that has grown out of the African continent. It has different names in different parts of the continent. For example, in Kenya, where I am in Kiswahili, it's called Utu, which means personhood. In Shona, down in Zimbabwe, it's Unhu. In Botswana, it's Boto, and other variations. But Ubuntu basically means humanness. And it comes from that notion that I am because we are. that our destinies and our lives are inextricably linked, meaning that I am only fully human in the context of other human beings and in relation with them. So it reminds me to act as one who is part of a greater collective. And maybe I just need to also just put a little disclaimer. It's not communism, it is communitarianism. It just means that we are working together as a collective to solve issues and to build conviviality and harmony. And within the structure of Ubuntu, every voice matters. So the traditional hierarchy of top-down is negated, because if every human being is important, then anyone can speak and anyone can contribute to the well-being of the commonwealth or the collective.
Thanks. Thanks for reminding
that. Nelson Mandela was one of our great proponents of Ubuntu through his own life. People like Desmond Tutu and a few other African leaders have demonstrated the power of Ubuntu, even in healing painful pasts and co-creating new realities and future directions for entire peoples.
Yeah,
fresh insight that one is getting from that is, be it power or responsibility. I mean, either or gives you a certain sense of only you can solve this problem. Whereas embracing the humanness, it's actually even greater than humility. The fact that collectively, so humility doesn't have a collectivism in it. But what you just discussed, at least for me, was a fresh insight of a humility, actually, humanness being bigger than humility. That there is the other and we can collectively solve a problem. I thought that was interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the way I'd see it is that humility is internalized. It's that which keeps you real and keeps you honest, while humanness is that which extends you to the rest of and interconnects you with the rest of humanity.
So building on that.
So could.
Go on.
Yeah. Sonia.
No, I was just saying, building on that, Anil Reddy is asking design and policy makers, what's the next step to make a nation realize the importance of design? How do we make the echoes of conversations like these felt elsewhere? I think it's a very, very powerful question. So what do you think?
Well, I think, like I said, since design is a political act, we just need to amplify this voice. And then people also are more more easily convinced when there is demonstrators of what one is saying. So there is not just an abstract philosophical notion. So I believe that we should be busy prototyping and piloting promising ideas, and also emphasizing them through that amplification factor that we're mentioning. We've seen countries, if I go back to Denmark again, the home of Lego, we've seen how by embracing design, one city or town became a global example, and how that infused that kind of thinking into the rest of the country, and how it's one of the examples in the region. We saw how a company like IKEA transformed the way people thought about, first of all, Sweden, but also about design for disassembly and about sustainability from a very different angle. So I think all these exemplars, if you look at nations like Finland, which are incredibly innovative nations, or even South Korea, there's something that has happened locally that has become a national agenda. So part of this conversation is to take what is already existing and amplify it nationally. Once it's amplified nationally, then the rest of us nations are quick to respond. So for example, in South Africa, we heavily referenced Finland and South Korea when we're looking at nations that are high up on the innovation indexes. And I think it's important that we don't negate the power of what we do. How a company like Apple has the assets are far higher than many GDPs of many countries. And this is one company that has just used design right at its core to kind of demonstrate the efficacy of design. So if we start to show people what design has already done, and we're able to quantify it, and even show the monetary contribution and value, or even intangible things like design for well-being, how people become happier because the quality of life is improved, not just the standard of living. I think then people start to turn to design and say, oh, maybe we could try this too. And sure enough, when they do try, they realize, just like the case of Curitiba in Brazil, many cities around the world started looking at that model, and they actually improved the situations all the way to Dar es Salaam in Tanzania, Santiago in Chile, and all over the world. There are many other cities that were looking at how one city, Curitiba, did it. And that was because it had a prototype. It wasn't saying it was perfect, but it had something that could demonstrate the ideas. It's something that externalized the thinking. That was an expression of this idea of trying to solve problems using creativity. And I think if we did more and more of that, and there were more greater numbers of exemplars that then we shared in an interconnected network like this, then people will start to say, I think I get it. I see design. I know what the problem used to be, and I can see now things are better. And if it's design as the catalyst, then I certainly want to sign up for design.
It becomes our responsibility to share the stories, to excite their imagination. I think we should take that responsibility. Very well said, yeah.
Yeah, and I think the difference between design activism and political activism, for example, is that designers always end up with a positive contribution. So they act upon the situation, that's the activism, but the end result of the activism is a qualitative improvement of whatever that situation was. I cannot make the same promises politically. I've seen situations where people stood and came out to do what was right and talked about the right things, but the destruction that followed, actually you start asking, surely, even if I had empathy for the cause, I cannot justify the fact that we are worse off than we were before.
So building on that, actually, if you can tell us a little bit more about design activism and link it to Rahul's question, who was asking about the fact that Gandhian experiments are seen as social engineering. You know, so sometimes we see them as design interventions. So to generate new meaning. So how do you link that to what you are saying about design activism?
Okay, the first thing about why I fear the word engineering is because engineering sounds like it's a top-down agenda where people have no choice, that they are expected to do things, like when you heavily monitor people or censor them or control their movement. That for me is not the way design works. Design is elective. You do things and then people are inspired by what they see as a qualitative improvement and they desire it. It's like what we say, that consumerism is how people vote through their wallets. So similarly, you're not forcing people, they actually voluntarily give money and buy something, and that kind of demonstrates a popularity of a product or a service. And in design, it's the same way. You can actually present a solution and people can subscribe to it and no one is compelled to do so. So if design activism then at its root core, its ethos, the ethical foundation of that is to improve quality of life, to be part of the solution, to make the world a better place through design, then people will opt to want to do it. They will not feel compelled to. And once enough people do it, then there's a critical mass that will make the few that think it doesn't, they don't need to join in, will see that it does indeed make sense. But I'm very cautious about anything that is legislated or forced upon people, because people are sentient beings. They want to think about why they want to do things, and they want to own the decisions they make. And when there's resistance because of a form of dictatorship, then I would be a bit nervous about that. I would just say, let's demonstrate it, let's pilot it, let's show it, let's invite people to see it, let's amplify it. And once people see what we are discussing, then they might desire. So all we need to tell them is how they can become part of that solution like the rest of us.
I like design as a, I'm going to keep that with me safely.
Thanks. Now I have a good news and I have a bad news. The good news is that the conversation is getting deeper and richer and it's so fascinating. And the bad news is that we are already by the hour. No. We already spent our happy hour together. So Mugendi, I see many questions there or comments, and I'm afraid we won't be able to have everything dealt with. So how are we going to proceed, Sonia?
So I would say that we share these questions and provocations with Mugendi, and if he's open to it, we'll help you put the answers together, be it as video clips or be it as text. Does that make sense?
I'm very agreeable, but having talked about dancing earlier on, since the dance steps are starting to change, I could say if you've got three unique questions that I can address in a pechakucha kind of response and then leave the exposition for another time, I'd be happy to do that so that we don't suppress this interest that is emerging.
Okay. So what I see emerging here is that the conversation needs to continue in some ways with some tempos. And my suggestion, because I think we need to respect the timings of people who are attending and who subscribe for an hour, is that maybe with Mugendi and Sonia, we'll co-create something that we'll share back on Design Open Happy platform in the coming weeks. Is that okay? Because then we would have co-created and try to shape something which try to address the questions we have seen emerging. And that will allow us to have Design Open as an open platform for pushing the conversation. If Mugendi, you are okay to dance with us, then Sonia and myself and the spread team will think about something. And what we might also do is involve all the other Design Open Happy speakers in trying to shape a new form of dance. I would suggest that as a creation mode.
Well, you and Sonia are good dancers, so I'll take your advice on that one. I want to thank everyone for the interest and all my buddies. There's a saying in Nigeria, if you throw a stone into a crowded marketplace, the first person you strike would most likely be your own relative. And just based on the participants, I can see a lot of my relatives, my kindred spirits out there. And I want to thank you for this opportunity as Spread Design for inviting me, and also through this theme of Design Open and Happy. Actually, I've seen those expressions in this particular conversation. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Mugendi. Thanks for being with us and closing this season of Design Open Happy. And Sonia, the last word to you.
No, I think we've all learned a lot in this session, in this series, and truly we didn't even realize when the time ended. So I think we take the responsibility of ensuring that the dance continues. Thank you.
Thanks to all the attendees, thanks to the spread team, and thanks to all the speakers which allowed to have this dance running for 16 weeks, every 15 days, one dance. And all these can be seen and watched on YouTube in the coming days for the session with Mugendi. So have a nice end of evening in India, a nice afternoon in Europe, a nice end of morning in the States or in Brazil. I see Bara from Brooklyn. Your question will be addressed in the coming weeks in the next dance. So thank you everyone for showing and giving your time to us. Enjoy and stay safe.
Bye and stay safe, everyone. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.